This is a cutaway of a Husqvarna string trimmer. And the carburetor's on this side. The fuel goes straight in. The air comes in, it goes through the carburetor. You got your little screws that everybody wants to mess with. And I'll pass this around so you can look at it closer. They put limiter caps on it to prevent you from going too lean or too rich. But you have a little bit. So if you change altitudes, you can actually adjust it to make it run a little bit different. But they've put limiter caps to keep you from moving it too lean that it'll seize, or too rich where it plugs up the muffler on it. So as the fuel comes through the carburetor, it draws fuel. Air travels through it, draws fuel in, it goes straight in, and then it travels straight down. And it goes down in here where the crankshaft is. It goes down, and the air, or the fuel, since it's mixed with oil already, you've put a mixture of air and oil and fuel together. When it goes down there, as the fuel in its semi-vapor form starts swirling around in this crankcase, the oil that's in the fuel will stick to the different components. The bearings, the crankshaft, the needle bearings that are in the connecting rod on the top, the wrist pin on the piston, all those components are attacked basically by the oil that's in the fuel. And that's not very much oil, but it's enough to lubricate, and over time it's enough. And so as it attacks and hits all these components, what fuel does is it actually turns from its droplets of fuel to a vapor. And what happens to fuel? What does fuel, or what does a liquid do when it turns from a liquid to a vapor? Does it take in heat or give off heat?
Liquid to a vapor.
Liquid to a vapor does what? In order for any substance to go from a liquid to a vapor, it has to absorb heat. So what we're going to do is two things with this fuel. First thing we're going to do is the fuel has oil in it, and so when it hits the metal particles, the oil that's in the fuel lubricates. And then when the fuel touches the metal parts, it absorbs heat. And when it absorbs heat, it takes the heat out of the metal, it transfers. Remember, we don't have any oil. We don't have a pool of oil splashing up there, lubricating, going back in an oil pan, and then radiating heat out the oil pan like a four-stroke engine. We don't have that. So what do we use to cool the internal parts of an engine? And it's the fuel. And that fuel, when it touches those metal components, it absorbs heat, which converts it into more of a vapor. So it's part of that vapor. Part of the vaporization takes place in the carburetor, but you'll find that there's a lot of droplets going in, and when it touches the metal parts, it takes in heat, absorbs it out of there, and then it turns it into a vapor. Then it continues on the other side. It follows up the side of the cylinder wall, and there'll be a hole, just like the muffler hole. When you rotate this piston down, actually if you roll the piston up, you'll see a hole on the other side that comes up, and the fuel comes up that side and travels in right above the piston. And it gets into the cylinder area. When it goes into the cylinder, it's also touching the top of the piston and the cylinder walls. It continues to vaporize, it continues to absorb heat. Then the piston travels up, traps it, spark plug fires, ignites it, and then it goes out the exhaust pipe. The important thing is it's cooling this engine. If you lean your carburetor out and the RPMs rise really high, and you're like, wow, this thing sounds cool, listen to it, and it sounds pretty impressive when you lean a two-cycle out. The RPMs just really skyrocket. But what happens is you've taken the cooling capacity of your engine away. So your engine the engine temperature will rise dramatically, and it'll cause your engine to seize. When you lean it out and you put less fuel in there, that means you're also putting less oil in there. So it's kind of a combination, but the biggest factor is not necessarily the lack of oil, because there's already oil in there. The biggest factor is the fact that the temperature rises, the piston expands, the cylinders expand, and it'll start to melt the piston. And that's why it seizes. So we're going to check one. I'm going to show you how to adjust a carburetor on a two-cycle. If you have a problem or someone's messed with it, how do you do it? We're going to use both just a manual listening to it, and then we're going to use a tech manual and show you how to use the tech manual so that you're not guessing. So